The hum of tires on damp pavement still echoed in her head. Lucy sat upright in the passenger seat of the dark Mercedes SUV. Her fingers curled around the strap of her designer handbag as if it were a lifeline. Outside, the quiet Canadian town still slept. Street lamps glowed faintly against the last shadows of night, their yellow halos brushing against the frosted glass of the general store ahead. Oliver kept his hands on the wheel, knuckles pale, his jaw clenched in silence. He always carried that air of command, a weight that pressed into her chest more than it reassured. They had been parked there for what felt like forever, the clock on the dash crawling towards 7. She could almost taste the coffee brewing inside the shop, smell the faint sweetness of pastries she imagined resting behind the counter. Yet neither of them moved. She tugged lightly at her blonde wig, checking its alignment in the mirror. The disguise itched, strands of synthetic hair sticking to her lips with static. Oliver said it was necessary, just for today, just until they were safe. She swallowed her questions the same way she always did. When the door of the Glen Orchid General Store finally unlocked at precisely 7 am, Lucy expected him to open her door, to usher her inside. Instead, he simply watched, unmoving. Minutes stretched into an hour, her chest tight, until he finally muttered, "Now." The bell above the entrance gave a hollow jingle as they stepped inside. Fluorescent lights painted the narrow aisles in an unnatural glow. Lucy walked beside him, scanning the shelves, pretending to study labels she couldn't pronounce. Her heartbeat was louder than the hum of the refrigerators. She wondered if the woman behind the counter noticed her hesitation, if she could sense how badly Lucy wished to be invisible. They bought almost nothing: gum, bottled water, a pack of chips Oliver didn't even open. The restroom door clicked shut behind them, and for a long while, Lucy stayed inside. The walls pressed in, the mirror throwing back her face, pale and sharp under the wig. She left quickly, her hands trembling, and moments later Oliver whispered sharply, "She's here. We gotta go." Lucy didn't ask who. She never asked. When they slipped back into the SUV, she didn't look behind. But part of her knew the story wasn't staying in that restroom. Not the wig, not the bag, not the charger, the keys, the bullets. Pieces of her, pieces of him, already abandoned, waiting to be found. And as the SUV rolled away, Lucy's chest filled with a quiet dread. Somewhere, someone was about to stumble upon a secret she didn't yet understand. But what would happen when the truth inside that restroom trash bin no longer stayed hidden? Perfect. Let's expand episodes 2 through 7 into extended cinematic chapters, doubling their length, deepening Lucy's inner voice, sensory details, and psychological tension. Each will still end with a natural hook. The morning air clung damp and cold when Lucy followed Oliver into the general store. She moved quietly, her steps softened by nerves, though Oliver's stride was confident, practiced, as if he already owned the space. Shelves stacked with everyday goods, bread, canned beans, cleaning supplies, felt oddly surreal, like props on a stage. She kept her eyes lowered, pretending to browse, but her mind buzzed with the same thought on repeat. Act normal, act normal. They picked up a few things, small purchases to mask their presence. A chocolate bar, a bottled water, gum. Ordinary items to hide the extraordinary weight sitting in her chest. Then Oliver's voice broke the stillness. "We'll use the washroom," he said, matter of fact, already steering her down the narrow aisle. Inside the restroom, the fluorescent light hummed faintly above. Lucy lingered too long, staring at her own reflection. Her face looked foreign, her hair limp, her skin pale with unease. Oliver was moving briskly, his hands restless, his whispers sharp and hushed. A bag rustled. Something hidden was tucked away. And then the words that jolted her spine. "She's here. We gotta go." They left quickly, their exit almost too casual, the little bell over the store's door chiming, as if to announce them. Lucy's heart wouldn't steady. She felt as though they had left behind a trace, some piece of themselves in that restroom. Later, she would learn what the manager found, a plastic bag in the trash, heavy with secrets, 40 unused bullets, a blonde wig, stained clothing, a blood-smeared phone charger, and the keys to a luxury Audi. Each object screamed danger, whispered guilt. Lucy hadn't touched the bag herself, but she felt the weight of it anyway. She could already imagine the discovery, the suspicion it would ignite, the eyes that would start searching. As they drove away, Oliver's knuckles white on the steering wheel, Lucy's thoughts gnawed at her. What had they really just left behind? Evidence of someone else's story, or evidence of her own unraveling life? The first mirror that ever lied to her hung at the end of a hallway with floors so polished they looked wet. Lucy remembers being coached to walk without smudging anything, air, glass, expectation. Winnie would pass, pause, tilt Lucy's chin with 2 fingers. Lower the lashes, not too much. The lesson was simple. Reflections are auditions. You don't wait to be chosen. You choose what they're allowed to see. Years later, in the general store restroom, that old lesson trailed her like the smell of bleach. The mirror was not charitable. Fluorescence carved out the truth. Sleep-deprived eyes, wig line imperfect as a seam stressed by too much fabric. The plastic bag on the counter felt heavier than plastic should. 40 small cylinders cool against each other. A charger striped in red she pretended was nail polish. Cloth that had absorbed something no detergent should have met. She told herself control was still possible if she behaved like someone who believed in control. She wrapped a scarf around the doubt in her throat. She put the bag down with a careful, almost reverent movement, the way she used to set down centerpieces at her mother's galas, making sure the camera would love every angle. On the drive away, she practiced not looking back, because looking back is a confession even if your mouth never opens. Oliver said something about timing, about lanes, about the road that mattered. His voice stayed in the practical, as if real danger only begins when you name it. Nights blur differently when you're no longer tracking days but doors. Doors you go through. Doors you don't. Lucy starts measuring sleep in how many times she jolts before her body surrenders. The mirror lesson holds. If you can keep your face arranged, maybe the inside will follow. Except the inside has learned a new trick. It mimics the hum of distant lights and the whisper of a manager's startled breath. She wasn't in that room when the bag was found, but her body insists it gives her the exact weight of the discovery in the palms, the split second of denial before the heartbeat climbs. She closes her eyes, and the hallway comes back, gleaming, unforgiving. Lower the lashes, not too much. Choose what the world is allowed to see. The world will choose anyway. If a mirror can be taught to lie, can a life be taught to tell the truth? Time blurred after that day. Weeks melted into months, each one carrying Lucy further from the calm of her old world. She had once lived in Toronto's polished glow, wrapped in the warmth of privilege, her life punctuated by luxury and indulgence. Now she moved like a shadow across borders, her name whispered through police radios. She watched Oliver handle everything. He chose the countries, the hotels, the cash. She told herself that following him was survival, that he knew what he was doing. Still, there was an edge to him now, more restless, more volatile. He barely spoke unless it was about logistics. Which flight, which disguise, which address. In Europe, the cities blurred together. Cafes with clinking cups, train stations with cold, hollow announcements, unfamiliar languages washing over her ears. She tried to lose herself in crowds, but every stranger's glance felt too sharp, too curious. Every black SUV parked on a corner made her chest tighten. She clutched her phone sometimes, scrolling through fragments of her old life, filtered photos with her sisters, staged smiles at charity galas, captions written to project perfection. She almost laughed at the absurdity. How had she gone from glamorous daughter of Winnie Lee to fugitive hiding under aliases in a dingy flat in Prague? Then one night, the knock came, firm, inevitable. Interpol agents stood in the hallway, their presence filling the space before words could. Oliver's face tightened. Lucy's body froze. She expected shouting, chaos. Instead, it was almost gentle. They spoke with practiced calm, as though arresting her was a routine chore. Still, Lucy's pulse roared. She caught Oliver's eyes one last time as they pulled her away. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between defiance and resignation. When she was led to the car, Lucy thought, so this is what being caught feels like. Not fire and fury, but a quiet hand on the shoulder closing the last open door. And as the city lights passed by outside the window, one thought lingered, unshakable. Was she coming home to face the truth? Or only to play the role her family had already scripted for her? The room was bare, windowless, a gray box that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. Lucy sat at the metal table, the chill of it seeping through the thin police blanket draped around her shoulders. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but every sound in that space felt magnified. The scrape of a chair, the shuffle of papers, the deliberate footsteps of officers who seemed to orbit her. When the door opened, she looked up. An officer stepped in, his tone polite but sharp around the edges. He asked how her flight had been. Lucy gave a small, exasperated laugh, the kind she used when trying to charm strangers. Terrible, she said. Economy class. Can you believe that? My mother even offered to fly us all back on her jet, but apparently that wasn't allowed. Her words hung in the air, met with silence that felt heavier than any accusation. The officer finally spoke. We don't accept gifts, especially not jets. Lucy forced a smile, but inside she felt the sting. She knew the remark revealed more than she intended, the wealth she came from, the life of endless shortcuts, the world she thought could solve anything with money. Still, she leaned back, as if relaxed, as if untouchable. It was easier than letting them see the quake in her chest. But the truth seeped in through the smallest cracks. Every question reminded her that she was no longer on the outside looking in. She was inside the box now, and there was no flight, no jet, no mother's influence that could carry her out. As the session ended, Lucy stared at the mirrored wall. Her own reflection looked strange there, pale, tired, eyes carrying the shadows of Europe. For a flicker of a moment, She wondered if Oliver was sitting in another room just like this, spinning his own story. And that thought alone made her shiver. There is a photograph the public hasn't seen. 3 figures on a staircase, knees angled the same, chins turned to catch the same slice of winter sun. The Mia triplets. Lucy in the middle, because the middle was always the safest place to disappear without leaving the frame. On the wall behind them, a calendar crowded with circles, arrows, events. Fundraisers that tasted like sparkling water over nerves. Coaching sessions that sounded like gentle applause over a metronome. Brand is inheritance, Winnie would say, laughing like champagne. Smile with your eyes. Hold your breath on the click. Her daughters learned to sit in dresses that never wrinkled and to carry conversation like a lit candle through a crowded room. Later, in a box-like room where the air tasted like paper, Lucy discovered that what looks like inheritance can also be a script. She tried to read from it. A light joke about an economy seat. An anecdote about a mother's generosity extending to officers who would never accept it. She heard the officer's patience like a slow door closing. She had the wrong script for this room. Triptychs are hung so each panel flatters the others. Remove one, and the wall looks unfinished. Lucy had always feared being the removable panel. She now suspects she was the hinge built to make the other 2 look balanced. The thought arrives without bitterness, just a tired kind of clarity. That night, she imagines the staircase without her, 2 figures angled to the light. The calendar still crowded. Somewhere, a photographer apologizes that he didn't notice the missing middle until the proofs came back. Someone nods briskly and books a new shoot. She sets her palms on the interrogation table and notices how still her hands can be when she decides they must be. The body remembers pageants of composure. The heart remembers what happens after the click when the smile drops and breath rushes back too fast. If you were trained to be one panel in a perfect set, what do you become when the nails give way? The headlines spread like wildfire. Lucy Lee, daughter of Winnie Lee, accused in a high-profile murder. The story twisted itself across newspapers, television panels, gossip feeds. Her name was no longer hers, it was a commodity. In her cell, Lucy read snippets of legal papers, the words dense and suffocating. But when Liam O'Connor entered, everything shifted. His presence was commanding, his confidence a shield she could almost believe in. He explained it bluntly. Wealth was not just power, it was survival. You have resources most don't, he said. We'll use them. An army of experts, investigators, psychologists. We'll build doubt piece by piece. Lucy nodded, though unease tugged at her ribs. The idea of an army fighting for her made her feel less like a person and more like a project, a case file bought and paid for. Yet she couldn't deny the relief. If money could sway the battlefield, then maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. At night, she thought about it differently. Her family's fortune had always been a net beneath her, catching her, carrying her, lifting her above consequences. But what if, this time, it wasn't a net at all, but a stage? What if they weren't saving her life, but putting her on display, dressing her up for a jury the same way her mother had dressed her up for galas? And yet, as the trial date loomed, Lucy whispered to herself the same fragile mantra, better a stage than a cell. When Liam revealed his strategy, Lucy's heart sank. He would paint her as a fool, a childish, spoiled daughter, naive to the point of absurdity. He would strip her dignity down to its barest threads so the jury might see her as harmless, incapable of intent. She wanted to protest, to scream, but the words stuck in her throat, drowned out by his calm explanation. They'll believe it. They'll pity you. And pity, Lucy, is more valuable than truth. She sat in silence, her mind flickering back to her sisters. The triplets, the brand, the polished images of them all, perfect smiles, flawless skin, a matching set of success stories. She had always been the eldest, the one her mother spoke of with the most pride, the one meant to blaze the trail. Now her role was inverted, from shining star to dimmest light, from model daughter to the stupidest person alive. The thought gnawed at her. Was this what she had been reduced to? A parody of herself, stripped of agency just to survive. Still, she nodded. She agreed. Because survival, once again, mattered more than pride. That night, she wondered if her sisters were watching. If they saw the headlines, if they whispered about her downfall behind perfect lips, did they mourn her? Or did they thank fate that, for once, it wasn't them under the glare of the world's judgment? Lucy turned over in her narrow bed, whispering into the darkness. What's worse, being guilty in truth, or being remembered as stupid forever? Airports teach a special kind of exhaustion. The benches are designed to keep you half awake, half gone. Lucy learns to nap with one eye open, to count safety by the sound of other people's languages filling the ceiling. She ties her hair differently in bathrooms that smell of citrus and recirculated lives. Oliver plots with the patience of a cartographer. He doesn't talk in futures, only in routes. On trains, she studies reflections in black windows and tries to catalog who she has been in the last 24 hours. The tired tourist, the delayed student, the woman who doesn't know how to pronounce the station they just passed. She learns where to stand so cameras catch height but not depth. She learns which shops take cash without questions and which clerks ask about hometowns like it has small talk and not a net. Sleep comes in coins. 5 minutes here, 12 there. In one cheap flat, the radiator ticks like a watch buried in drywall. In another, the mattress slants and the floorboards answer back when you turn over. Oliver's phone glows. He watches maps like weather, looking for storms named after men. When she dreams, it's always in half scenes. A door opens, but no one enters. A phone vibrates without caller ID. A blonde wig slides across a tile floor, stopping at a drain that won't swallow it. She wakes and tells herself she's learning. This is a skill set. This is adaptability, the kind articles praise in people who flee nothing but boredom. Morning asks for a face again. She gives it one. She even manages a joke once, something light enough to float 2 inches off the ground before falling. Oliver doesn't catch it. She files the silence under useful information. They pass another border. The stamp is polite. The officer's eyes dart once to the photograph, once to Lucy, and then away, as if refusing intimacy with strangers is a moral stance. She almost thanks him for that small mercy. She is surprised by how elastic time becomes when you are not allowed to own any of it. Days stretch like gum and snap like it too. She thinks of Winnie charting calendars with a pen bold as instruction. She thinks of calling. She doesn't. Once, she writes a message and deletes the nouns. It looks like poetry without courage. The skill you practice becomes the person you are. She practices the vanishing act. She becomes very good at it. How long can a person stay blurred before the edges refuse to come back? Her mother's presence loomed even in her absence. Winnie Lee, matriarch, mogul, relentless force of will. Lucy had grown up under her gaze, each day measured by achievement, each choice judged by standards higher than skyscrapers. Winnie didn't simply raise children, she curated them. Like exhibits, polished and displayed. The triplets were her crown jewel, 3 perfect faces in a row, 3 futures mapped out before they could even choose. Lucy remembered the galas, her mother's voice carrying over the crowd, boasting of connections with ministers, CEOs, even the Prime Minister himself. Performers from Cirque du Soleil twirling overhead while Lucy smiled at strangers, her cheeks aching, her dress chosen not for comfort, but for optics. And always the comparisons. Who had more followers this week? Who had landed the better internship, the more impressive brand deal? Lucy often felt like a stock on her mother's exchange, rising, falling, always tracked. Now, in the sterile glow of custody, those memories twisted sharp. Because she knew, without doubt, that her mother was already recalibrating, already rewriting Lucy's narrative in public. Winnie had once declared her a Harvard student, omitting the detail of the extension program. She would find another way now to soften the scandal, to protect the family name, to twist Lucy's trial into a story of resilience. Lucy shivered. Not from fear of prison, but from fear of disappearing into her mother's machinery, of becoming nothing more than a cautionary tale dressed in designer clothes. And as she lay awake, she asked herself, was she ever truly her own person? Or had she only ever been her mother's reflection, waiting to crack? Inheritance of silence. Lucy had learned early that silence could be dressed up to look like obedience. At fundraisers, when questions came from strangers who wanted to measure the triplets like horses at an auction, she stayed quiet. Winnie would beam and say, "They're disciplined." The truth was simpler. Words stuck. They clung to the roof of Lucy's mouth like candy that had melted wrong. In the windowless interrogation room, silence became something else entirely. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't discipline. It was suspicion. Every second she didn't answer was another thread for them to knot around her. But silence had its inheritance. She could sit for long stretches without twitching. She could lower her lashes and imagine the way cameras used to flash, the way polite applause filled the air. She could remember being praised for composure. She wondered if the officers could smell composure the same way they smelled guilt. Oliver had told her once that silence buys time. He'd said it like he was quoting scripture. But time, Lucy now understood, wasn't currency here. It was rope. And rope phrase. When she finally spoke, her own voice startled her, thin, breathy, carrying more of the girl in the photograph than the woman in the chair. She heard her mother immediately. "Sit up straighter. Don't whisper. Don't let them think you're fragile." She tried to do all 3 at once. The words still trembled. What if the inheritance you've polished all your life becomes evidence against you? Lucy pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, though the room was already warm. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent, its scratchy edge grazing her chin whenever she moved. Across the table, 2 officers watched her, their gazes steady but unreadable. She hated the way the silence lingered between questions, as though they were waiting for her to betray herself with a sigh, a glance, a fidget. She remembered her mother's instructions, Winnie's clipped voice over the phone, cold as polished marble. Say nothing. Nothing without your lawyer. Lucy nodded then, just as she nodded now, keeping her lips pressed together, her eyes wide, as if innocence could be performed. But the silence pressed heavy. She filled it the only way she knew how, with her own fragility. I don't understand why I'm here, she whispered, curling the blanket tighter. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she let it hang in the air. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them leaned forward, hands folded neatly on the table. You don't understand, Lucy? His voice was calm, even gentle, but every syllable carried weight, because we've been following you across 2 continents. We've seen the disguises, the flights, the phones. People don't run like that unless there's something to hide. Her throat burned. She forced a nervous laugh, shaking her head. That wasn't me. That was Oliver. He made me. I didn't even know what he was planning half the time. You don't know him like I do. Her words tumbled quickly, desperate to separate herself from the storm. But even as she spoke, she could feel how thin the line was, how fragile the performance. She thought of her sisters, the Mia triplets. How perfect they always seemed, perfectly lit, perfectly posed. Did they pity her now, or did they sneer, relieved that she was the broken one, the disposable one? The officer scribbled something in his notebook. Lucy's stomach twisted. Every mark of his pen felt like another brick stacked on the wall around her. She tugged at the blanket, feeling suddenly suffocated beneath its weight. Somewhere deep inside, the question echoed. Was this the story she would always be trapped in? The naive daughter, the foolish triplet, the weak link who didn't know when to stop following? The officer closed his notebook softly, and Lucy braced herself. There are moments Lucy remembers not as images but as touch. Oliver's hand on the back of her neck, steady when he guided her through crowds. Oliver's palm, warm against hers, pressing car keys into her grip. But there were other moments too. His knuckles white around the steering wheel, bloodless and tense. His hand slamming the dashboard when a plan wobbled. Fingers jabbing the air like he could puncture fate itself. She thinks about his hands when the officers tell her Chin's story. She tries to picture Oliver placing the SIM card in Chin's palm, making it sound casual, even friendly. A favor. He was good at that, turning instructions into gifts. She remembers his hands tugging at her sleeve in the parking lot, yanking her toward the car. She'd stumbled, the world tilting. He'd gripped her wrist so hard she could feel the ache even hours later. He called it urgency. She called it love back then. Now, under the hum of fluorescent light, she isn't sure what to call it. Oliver's hands had built the scaffolding of her choices. Each gesture a plank, each command a nail. She climbed because she trusted the structure. Only now does she realize she never asked what it was built for. Do we ever know someone's hands until we see what they leave behind? The walls of the interrogation room seemed closer every time she returned. The air was still heavy, the same bitter mix of paper and coffee. But now there was something sharper beneath it, a tension that prickled her skin before anyone even spoke. The officer slid a file across the table. Lucy hesitated, then opened it. The first photograph was a man she didn't recognize until she read the name, Chin, Oliver's friend. Her pulse stuttered. The officer's voice was measured, but beneath it, Lucy heard the quiet satisfaction of a trap snapping shut. He says he never knew the victims, Tyler and Jordan. never even met them. But you know what he did know? The officer leaned closer, lowering his voice. He knew you, and he knew Oliver. He said Oliver asked him to do something strange. Something about swapping SIM cards with you, so your family couldn't track you. Lucy's fingers tightened around the blanket draped over her lap. The words felt like a thread being pulled, unraveling a sweater she had been clinging to for warmth. She pictured Chin's face now, baffled, insisting it was nothing more than a favor for a rich friend. Just a SIM card. Just a meeting. Her thoughts spiraled. Oliver had promised it was harmless, just a technical trick, a way to keep her mother's prying eyes at bay. And she believed him, because believing him had always been easier than facing the truth. The officer's eyes didn't leave her. Tell me, Lucy, why would someone go to those lengths just to hide from family? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She thought of her mother's watchful gaze, the way Winnie tracked her daughters as though they were investments. She thought of Oliver, whispering that this was just a small step, just one more secret to keep them safe. And she thought of the warehouse parking lot, of sounds she couldn't erase, of the way Oliver had screamed at her to run. Her voice finally cracked through the silence, softer than she intended. I didn't think it meant anything. He told me it was nothing. But even as the words left her mouth, Lucy knew the officers weren't convinced. And somewhere deep inside, neither was she. The file closed with a quiet snap, and the officer pushed it aside. Lucy's chest tightened. Because if Chin's story was true, then the trail no longer belonged to Oliver alone. It led straight back to her. She tried to steady herself as the officers asked her to explain. This time, she didn't just stay silent. This time, she spoke. Her voice shook at first, as though every word was a step onto uncertain ground. She told them she hadn't planned anything. That Oliver had said they were only going to meet friends. Tyler and Jordan. That it was just supposed to be a conversation, nothing more. She described sitting in the car with Jordan, the two of them waiting while Oliver and Tyler spoke, the minutes dragging. The cold bite of the steering wheel beneath her hands. Jordan chatting about nothing in particular, plans, business, life, words Lucy barely absorbed because her nerves were fraying. Then the sound. 2 sharp cracks echoing through the lot. Pop, pop. Lucy froze. Her breath caught halfway. When she looked up, she saw Tyler on the ground. And Oliver, frantic, eyes wide, shouting at her to run. She swallowed hard, remembering the panic, the way her pulse had thundered as Oliver yanked open the door, pulling her with him. It was self-defense, he screamed, his voice breaking. They were going to kill me. You don't understand. His gang, his people, they'll come for us next. Lucy repeated those words now, her voice trembling in the sterile room. She wanted the officers to feel her fear, to see the way Oliver's panic had taken root inside her, convincing her they were already hunted. That flight wasn't betrayal, it was survival. She spoke of Europe then. Of hurried flights, rented cars, aliases that never felt real. Of warnings she'd sent her family, urging them to leave their homes before it was too late. She painted herself as caught in Oliver's storm, dragged by currents too strong to resist. Her throat ached when she finished, but for a moment, silence settled. She almost believed they understood, that they might see her as she wanted to be seen, frightened, naive, caught in the wrong place at the worst time. But then the officer's pen tapped softly against the table. Once, twice. His eyes never left hers. Lucy felt her chest tighten, a knot of dread twisting deeper. Because in that silence, she heard what he wasn't saying. If this was truly her story, why did so many of the pieces still not fit? Courtrooms have their own weather. The air is cool and smells of wood and careful judgment. People dress like they're meeting a version of themselves they hope to keep. Lucy sits and learns the currents. When the temperature drops as a witness finds a word that costs them. When it warms a degree as a juror softens at a photograph they recognize as a life they once had. Liam controls climate like a seasoned magician. He lowers the likes with adjectives. He opens windows with pauses. He teaches Lucy to breathe in counts of 4 inhale, hold, release, hold, until the heart believes it is obeyed. Jordan's voice moves through the room like a front line. Not a storm, not anymore. Something steadier. Reported weather. This happened, then this, and then this. Lucy feels each sentence settle on her skin like the kind of rain that soaks without drama. She cannot get dry in it. Oliver sits angled just so, a statue that refuses pigeons. She tries not to read him. She fails. Once, his profile softens into the man who bought her pastries and forgot to eat them. It hardens before her breath finishes. When court breaks, hallways fill with reporters who wear smiles like business cards. They say her name in practiced syllables. Lucy learns to keep her gaze on the middle distance, where nothing hurts yet. She learns the exact weight of the word alleged and how it changes in other people as mouths. Back inside, the wood gleams with the vanity of furniture that knows it has hosted greater dramas. Lucy wonders what other verdicts live trapped in these grain lines. What other daughters sat exactly here and tried not to scratch the table? The judge returns. Weather shifts. Everyone stands. Gravity takes a half step closer. What does a room remember after you leave it? The facts or the temperature you brought? The courthouse felt colder than any cell Lucy had known. Not in temperature, but in weight. The gravity of eyes pressing from every direction. Cameras outside clicked like mechanical insects, feeding on every angle of her face. Inside, the courtroom itself became a stage, its wood polished to a sheen, its silence broken only by the shuffle of papers and the steady pulse of a gavel that never struck, but always threatened. Lucy sat beside Liam O'Connor, her defense attorney, his presence towering even in stillness. He had dressed her deliberately, a soft sweater, minimal makeup, hair brushed into a style that whispered fragility. She looked younger this way, smaller, as though innocence might be woven into fabric and hairpins. The prosecution began with fire. Photographs of the warehouse. Bullet casings lined up in evidence bags. Jordan Romano's testimony, her voice trembling but resolute as she described the night, the sounds, the pain, the loss. Lucy felt the words strike like stones. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the wood grain of the defense table. But she couldn't look away from Jordan's face. Pale, scarred, haunted, yet unbroken. Oliver's presence was a storm at the far end of the courtroom. He sat rigid, his jaw set, eyes sharp as blades. Sometimes she caught him looking at her, not with love, not even with anger, but with something colder, as if she were a piece of evidence herself, unpredictable, dangerous. When Liam stood to speak, the atmosphere shifted. His voice was calm, deliberate. weaving her story not as a criminal, but as a child adrift. He called her naive, superficial, incapable of the depth required for murder. He painted her as the victim of Oliver's gravity, pulled into his orbit, too foolish to see the destruction ahead. Lucy sat in silence, her cheeks warm with humiliation as she listened. Every word chipped away at her dignity. Juvenile, clueless, the most foolish girl alive. But every word also built the wall between her and the jury as suspicion. She hated it. She needed it. Day by day, the trial unfolded like theater. Witnesses called, lawyers sparring, evidence spread across the room like spilled ink. Each night, Lucy returned to her narrow bed, the echoes of testimony playing back in her mind. She heard Jordan's pain. She heard Oliver's silence. She heard her own name, twisted and reshaped until she barely recognized it. And as the trial stretched on, she wondered, was she still fighting for freedom? Or just fighting for a version of herself she could no longer believe in? The jury watched. The world waited. The final act drew near. The air was heavier on the day the verdict was read. Lucy sat in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the kind of charged silence that builds before a storm. Her sisters were there, seated in the gallery, their faces drawn and pale. They looked so much like her, same eyes, same frame, but untouched, still wrapped in the glossy armor of the life she'd once shared with them. She could almost hear their whispers in childhood, their mother's voice urging them toward perfection. Now they watched her like strangers, as though she were a reflection they could no longer claim. The judge's voice was steady, carrying each word like a weight dropping into water. The jury filed in, expressions unreadable. Lucy searched their faces desperately, hoping for softness, for pity, for anything she could cling to. Guilty. The word struck harder than she imagined. It echoed through her body, rattling her bones, settling deep in her chest like a stone sinking into dark water. She barely registered the rest, the sentencing, the formalities, the shuffle of papers, because that one word consumed everything else. Beside her, Liam placed a hand on her arm, comfort perhaps, or closure. But Lucy felt none of it. She felt only the collapse of the fragile story she had clung to, the unraveling of the performance, the realization that no disguise, no lawyer, no mother's influence could shield her from this final truth. Oliver stood too, his own verdict echoing across the room. Their fates, once intertwined, now sealed in parallel. She looked at him, searching for recognition, for a flicker of the bond that had carried them through Europe, through lies, through fear. But his eyes were cold, fixed forward, already distant. As she was led away, Lucy's thoughts drifted. To the store restroom where it all began, a bag of secrets left in a trash bin. To the endless flights, the disguises, the fear that never let her sleep. To her mother's unyielding gaze, to her sister's flawless smiles, to the girl she had been before Oliver, before the storm. The doors closed behind her with a hollow echo, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the weight of chains and verdicts, a question lingered like a shadow she could never escape. Had she ever truly been innocent, or had she always been waiting to fall? Nights are numbered now. There is relief in that, a ledger where chaos used to be. Lucy learns the arithmetic of time the way a child learns distance, by tripping over it. She discovers which hours go slow, after lights, before sleep, and which sprint, when a memory finds her and refuses to sit. She takes inventory without being asked. One name, several versions. One mother who built a weather system and called it home. Two sisters who learned to be parallel lines. One man who taught roots better than reasons. A handful of objects from a trash bin in a store that opens at 7. A phone that carried other people's locations like a favor. She tries on sentences at night the way she used to try on dresses. I didn't know. Too loose. I knew and couldn't stop it. Too tight. I knew enough and chose anyway. Fits differently depending on where she's standing. Sometimes she thinks about teaching mirrors to be kind to the next person. Sometimes she thinks about smashing them all and setting the glass like diamonds in the frames. Most nights she does neither. She lies still and lets the air pass through, uncomplicated, as if breath were the only truth that mattered. If she is lucky, the world will move on and forget the shape of her. If she is luckier, she will not. The last thought most evenings arrives quiet as a closing book. If a life is a story we tell ourselves in the dark, which version does the morning decide to keep?